Namaste. We have seen a detailed introduction to Bhagavad Gita over the last three episodes. So, today we will enter the proper text of Bhagavad Gita. As we do so, just one thing to point out is that Bhagavad Gita, being an old text and also written in verse form in Sanskrit, lends itself to many interpretations. So, it's important to have the right interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita in order for us to understand the meaning of it. And Shankaracharya's commentary represents the most sublime and authentic interpretation as it has been approved by scholars and realized beings across ages. So, Shankara's commentary is having the holistic vision, and it brings because he has written commentaries on all the Upanishads, and being a great scholar and a jnani, technically it's called Shrotriya and Brahmanishtha, he was able to bring the entire vision of Gita and put seemingly contradictory verses in the right context and explain it clearly. So that's very important for us to take use of. Otherwise, if you read the text directly with some English translation, it can lead to all kinds of contradictions sometimes. So we are going with Shankara's commentary, which is extracting the pure non-dual truth of Bhagavad Gita, just as Upanishads do. And so with that preface, let's enter the Gita. As far as Gita's verses go, of course, we begin with chapter 1, but I thought it would be interesting to look at the very last verse of Gita, because that's actually more of an invocation, and it is very pertinent to begin with, I feel. So the last verse of Gita is this: Yatra Yogeshwara Krishno, Yatra Partho Dhanurdara, Tatra Shri Vijayor Bhutir, Dhruva Nitir Matir Mama. Translation is that wherever there is Krishna, the great master of yoga, and Arjuna, the supreme archer, there will certainly be opulence, victory, prosperity, and righteousness. So, this is a nice invocation. This is spoken by Sanjaya, who is the narrator of the entire Bhagavad Gita. And he narrates the whole conversation, the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna as he sees it through his television to Dhritarashtra. This is how the whole dialogue is presented by Vyasa. And so he ends it with this beautiful invocation of Krishna and Arjuna. So I thought we can also begin with it to acknowledge that we are studying the dialogue between the master of all yogas, the supreme teacher Krishna, and the most sincere, eligible, and talented student Arjuna. So this is for us to bring both the sense of reverence to Krishna and the sense of confidence in ourselves and the sincerity in ourselves as Arjuna. So with this, we enter chapter 1, and the very first verse of Bhagavad Gita is the famous verse. Many of you probably know it, so I'll recite it. Atha pratamodhyayah dhritarashtra uvacha dharmakshetre kurukshetre samaveta yuyutsavah mamakav pandavaschaiva kimakurvata sanjaya. So this is Dhritarashtra asking the question to Sanjaya. Dhritarashtra, as we already saw in the context of Bhagavad Gita last episode, is the blind king of the 100 sons called the Kauravas. Technically, everyone is a Kaurava there because they are all part of the Kuru dynasty. So even the Pandavas are actually Kauravas because they are also of the same clan. But traditionally, the 100 cousins or rather 100 brothers, headed by Duryodhana, are referred to as Kauravas, and Pandu's sons, the five sons, are referred to as Pandavas. So Dhritarashtra is asking Sanjaya a simple question about what's happening in this field of battle called Kurukshetra. He prefaces that with the word Dharma Kshetra, which means the field of Dharma, and that happens to be the very first word of Gita, Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetre. So there is a lot of significance there that this book, this whole teaching begins with Dharma. And interestingly, the one of the last verses of Gita is Krishna teaching Arjuna to surrender all dharma when he says Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. So it is the journey from dharma to moksha. One can see like that, because dharma is a very important starting point. Without being rooted in dharma, one cannot truly approach teaching like that of Bhagavad Gita or Upanishad. But the essential teaching of Gita is to transcend even dharma. So we can see that it's a journey beginning from dharma and ending in moksha. Now, the other couple of points with this verse is that we can see the verse literally translates as follows: Hey Sanjaya, in this field of dharma, which is the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the assembled warriors who are my warriors and Pandavas, and what are they doing? So he is obviously referring only to his sons as his warriors, even though Pandavas are his own nephews. So he has tremendous partiality, which comes out of the blindness of attachment, which is very common. And we can see how we get blinded by attachment toward the follies of people who we think we are close to, and not being objective toward it. This is what Dhritarashtra represents. So Dhritarashtra asks, in this field of dharma, which is the battlefield of Kurukshetra, what happened when the warriors from both my side and Pandava's side assembled together, desirous to fight? So the other important point to mention here is that the word Dharmakshetra also has a metaphorical meaning, because Dharmakshetra refers to not only the physical place Kurukshetra, but it also refers to the inner field of Dharma. So the battle between Pandavas and Kauravas, as we already saw, symbolizes the battle between righteousness and unrighteousness, which is also within the human soul. And in the field of dharma, which is the soul of the human being, happens this tussle between righteousness and evil. And God is in the side of righteousness, which is represented by Krishna, aiding the Pandavas. And the unrighteousness is headed by arrogance, which is represented by Duryodhana. So that's why the word Dharmakshetra has a symbolic meaning too. And talking of symbolism, one more important symbolism which is good to point out is the whole way in which Arjuna is seated in the chariot has a great symbolism too, because as we know, we talked about the story of Krishna becoming Arjuna's charioteer. So Arjuna is seated in this chariot, it is drawn by five horses, and Krishna is the charioteer in the field of battle. And this very symbolism is presented in Kathopanishad as well. And therefore, it's very nice to see the symbolism there, because what Kathopanishad says is that the chariot is like the body, and the five horses are the five senses, and the five reins are the mind, and the charioteer is the intellect or buddhi, and the one sitting in the chariot is the atma, is the individual soul. So we can see here that Krishna is sitting as the charioteer. So Krishna represents buddhi, or the discriminating intellect. And therefore, the beautiful symbolism of Bhagavad Gita is that You are your own light. So, what is within us as the discriminating intellect is the only light that guides us, not anything without. The Guru can come in an outer form, but what he points to is only to the Guru within. So, this is why the Buddha also famously said, as his last parting words, be your own light. So, being one's own light is the symbolism of Krishna seated in the seat of buddhi or intellect and providing the counsel to Arjuna, who is being drawn in the battlefield, which represents the world, through the horses, which are the senses and the mind. So, with that symbolism, we can enter the next few verses. We are not going to see verse by verse, as I already mentioned. The first verse is important, so we saw the verse and the meaning. And there is also a context that's established by this verse and also the symbolism of how this takes place. Now, one of the important things is this context and these details are important because one may be in a hurry to get to the teaching, which actually comes only in the second chapter. And there is no teaching in the first chapter. But it's still very important because the first chapter, which represents the context and also the quality of Arjuna's sorrow and the conflict he's going through, all of that represents qualities that are necessary for a seeker, for a true technical word is jignasu, one who is interested in inquiry, one who is inquiring into the truth. So the story has, in its own way, the qualities of both the student and the teacher. And this is true with all Upanishad stories and so on. So this is definitely the case with Gita as well. So the second verse onwards, Sanjaya starts relating. And first he begins with Duryodhana going to Drona because the question asked to him was, what's happening in the battlefield? So he first sees through his um, television, he's blessed with the ability to see what's happening in the battlefield, sitting afar. So he sees Duryodhana going to the great master Drona, who is the teacher for both the Duryodhana and his brothers and the five Pandavas. And Duryodhana goes to Drona and he's showing him the Pandava army. He says, "Hey Dronacharya, look at this great army. It is led by Bhima and Arjuna, and they have great warriors on their side." So first he talks about the opposing army, and he also especially makes it a point to refer to Arjuna because he knows that Drona is, even though Drona taught archery to all of them, all the 100 brothers on this side and five on the other side, his dear student was Arjuna because Arjuna was the most brilliant archer. And therefore, he knows that though Drona is fighting on his side, and there is a lot of reasons for it, Drona and Bhishma were bound by what they felt was their dharma to fight on the wrong side. And yet, Duryodhana knew that his soft spot was for Arjuna. So he wanted to make sure that that does not in any way make him fight any less furiously or any less intensely. So he makes it a point to say that Arjuna is on the other side and there's a strong army there with so many other people. And he mentions all of them to incite Drona. And then he says, but on the other side, which is our side, we have also great warriors, including yourself. He tells Drona, you are a great warrior, and we have Bhishma and Karna and so on. So he's trying to rouse up the whole uh, Drona himself and the whole army on his side, kind of trying to rally it. And Bhishma hears this conversation because Bhishma is actually the general or the leader of the army, and therefore Bhishma takes his conch shell and he blows, and after that the whole army trumpets. So there is this scene of great rallying cry given by Bhishma and therefore the entire Kaurava army, the Dhartarashtra army. And once this happens, of course, Arjuna is on the other side, Krishna is the charioteer, and the whole Pandava army is on the other side. So then, hearing this rallying cry on the other side, Madhava, what's another name for Krishna. So, one thing we'll notice in the Gita is there are beautiful names of Krishna, and every time a different name is used, and each name has its own significance on what it represents of the divine nature of Krishna. Madhava means one who is the abode of all wealth, which includes knowledge, vidya, opulence, and all of it. So the name used is Madhava. Madhava and Arjuna, they blow their conches, and once they blow their conches, the entire Pandava army, and each conch has its name to which is all given. So Panchajanya, Devadatta, and so on. So all these conches are blown, and once these conches are blown, the entire army starts uh, blowing their trumpets and conches and all of that, just like the other side did. And because this side of Pandavas is so full of enthusiasm because they're fighting for the right cause, the sound made, the rallying cry is much louder, and it literally strikes fear in the hearts of the other side. And Arjuna especially is got his chariot which has the flag of Hanuman on it. It's referred to as Kapi Dwaja, that is the flag with monkey on it. So this flag symbolizes victory because Hanuman represents victory. There's the whole Ramayana story that symbolizes the great single pointed dedication and unbelievable uh, kind of efforts that Hanuman did single handedly in rescuing, in helping Ram to rescue Sita. So, so Hanuman is there in the flag of Arjuna. And there's another important symbolism here, which is that Arjuna is this great warrior. He's clearly by far the most talented archer of that era. And he puts in the hard work, he is talented, he's very sincere, and yet he also acknowledges that beyond his talent, beyond his skill, beyond his effort, there is a factor that's necessary for any work to become successful, and that factor is the divine factor, because things don't always go per plan. We know that, and we cannot simply pray. That is not encouraged, because that is an abandonment of one's own effort and confidence in one's own skill and all of that. But on the other hand, relying only on that and thinking that that will definitely make things happen is also not the case, as we know many times. So Arjuna represents this humility along with great skill, confidence, effort, talent. He also represents humility by carrying the flag of Hanuman, along with, of course, having Krishna as his charioteer. And he goes to he is now the attention shifts to Arjuna in the narration of Sanjaya. So after Duryodhana did all that and the rallying cry was made by both the armies, then Arjuna now looks at Krishna and he says, "Hey Hrishikesha." Hrishikesha is another name that means one who has all his senses under control, which is Krishna's another name. So we will see all these various names through the Gita. So he says, "Hey Hrishikesha, please station my chariot to be between the two armies so that I can see both sides clearly." And when he is asked to do so, Krishna then, because he's told by Arjuna, Arjuna also has many names, and one of the first names that's mentioned is Gudakesha. Gudakesha means one who has conquered sleep. So Arjuna it symbolizes that Arjuna was one of great energy and effort and hard work, and he literally conquered sleep. So thus asked by Gudakesha, Krishna stations the chariot between the two armies, and he tells, this is the very first time Krishna actually speaks in the Gita. It is not coming as Bhagavan Uvacha because it's in the middle of a verse, but it's still important because it's the first time Krishna says anything. He says, Partha Pashyaitan Samavetan Kuruniti. He says, Hey Partha, another name for Arjuna. Hey Partha, see the Kurus, which is, as we said, both sides are Kurus because they are of the same clan. Kuru dynasty, it's a civil war. So he says, Hey Partha, see the Kurus assembled on both sides. So once Krishna says that, Arjuna sees, looks on both sides, and he sees that there is all relatives and friends and uncles and granduncles and father-in-laws, and it's brother-in-laws, and it's filled with his relations on both sides. It's basically a civil war in the most intense sense. It's not a fight between two parts of the same nation, but it's literally a fight between two parts of the same family. And therefore, by seeing that, he starts shaking, and he is filled with this unspeakable sorrow, and he is filled with this, what he feels is an insurmountable compassion. And with this great compassion, he starts speaking, and he starts expressing his sorrow. So, how he expresses his sorrow, and based on that, what ensues is the rest of the Gita. So, we will see that as we go with the next episode. Namaste.